handling it. Joining us now is James Carafano from the Heritage Foundation, Shai Franklin, Middle East analyst and partner at Gotham Government Relations, and John Jordan, former naval intelligence officer and lawyer, is still with us. All right, Shai, let's start with you. The Democrats passing this resolution to limit the president's options with regards to Iran. Granted, it's mostly symbolic. Do you support this move?
Do I support them passing it? I suppose so. I think there are two issues here. One is whether the assassination was justified or not, and the other is should Congress have a role to play. So I think this puts Congress, at least the House, in the position of saying we need to be consulted, and nobody expects really the Senate to move forward with this. There's two different versions, the Senate version and the House version. Each has different legal ramifications. One would be could be vetoed by the president. One couldn't be vetoed by the president, but the Supreme Court has ruled that that kind of law isn't actually constitutional because the president gets to veto any legislation.
But symbolically, yeah. Because it seems like the Democrats, with this move, are saying they do not think that the president should have taken out one of the Iranian top terror masterminds. Do you support that then? I
don't think that's really what they're saying. I think what they're saying is that there was not sufficient justification for it.
Well, and that
in this case, the adult in the room was Iran because Iran gave a proportionate response. And, of course, the plane was shot down. The Ukrainian
John Jordan, do you agree? Was Iran the so-called adult in the room here, and that there wasn't sufficient justification to take out a man that has at least 600 American lives on his hands?
No, not at all. Keep in mind, President Obama launched 571 drone strikes, and there was nary a word of complaint from Democrats in Congress. Moreover, President Obama rightly ordered the raid that resulted in the death of Osama bin Laden, and again, no complaints. This is election year politics. This is Nancy Pelosi having to do things to placate her base on the left and do so in such a way which is non-binding congressional resolution, which isn't any different when Congress passes a resolution supporting the Boy Scouts of America's soapbox race, because it's not binding, it's not going to the Senate. So to do that in such a way to allow some of these members that represent Trump districts to vote with the president, but in a harmless way. This is a political stunt, nothing more.
James, this measure, as John Jordan points out, is a political stunt. It doesn't carry the force of law, but it does say that the president needs to withdraw U.S. forces from conflict with Iran within 30 days if he doesn't get congressional approval. What message does this send to Iran? Does this overall have some kind of detrimental impact on the U.S.'s position?
No, I don't think so, because I think the Iranians would rightly interpret that it doesn't really have any force, and that the president has full power and authority to do what he needs to do. I mean, if the U.S. Congress withdrew funding for U.S. operations in Iran, in Iraq, which they could do, that would, I think, get everybody's attention. But that's not going to happen. And I think the Iranians would rightly just conclude this is American domestic politics in terms of how they engage with the U.S. It doesn't really impact that. And indeed, the president's leadership actually, I think, is in the United States has been actually quite positive once you take the partisan debate out of it. And I think the Iranians would pay more attention to that. Americans are largely behind their president on this one.
All right, Shai, Republicans are saying that this is yet another example of policy from the Democrats being driven by anti-Trump sentiment. They're saying that the Democrats are being hypocritical, and they're pointing out to the fact that back in 2011, Pelosi herself said that President Obama did not require Congress's approval to launch attacks in Libya, and that he didn't need congressional authorization to keep forces in Libya then either. Let's watch.
So, Madam Speaker, or Madam Leader, you're saying that the president did not need authorization initially and still does not need any authorization from Congress on Libya?
Yes.
Thank you both.
Thank you all very much.
Shai, the Democrats just being hypocrites here when you have the House Speaker taking the exact opposite position now than she did in 2011?
I'm in Washington every week. I have to wash the hypocrisy off of me when I leave. Look, Libya.
So that's a yes.
Libya was the operations in Libya were authorized by the UN Security Council. Our entire presence in Iraq is in violation of the UN Security Council and international law, going back to 2003. The authorization for use of military force, under which President Obama was attacking various militias and others in Iraq and Afghanistan, that specifically applies to the war on terror. That doesn't apply to a war on Iran.
John, do you agree with the distinction that Shai is making?
No, I don't. The War Powers Act itself is arguably unconstitutional. The president doesn't constitutionally need an authorization for the use of military force. Let's be really clear here. Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president certain inviolable powers. Secondly, the Congress is vested with the power of the purse to pay for or not pay for a war, or to declare war. Other than that, the Congress can't pass a statute which infringes upon the constitutionally delineated power of either branch. This has never been tested. Keep in mind, the War Powers Act was passed in 1973 during the Nixon administration, when Nixon was very weakened, and was passed overriding a presidential veto. It's one of those few laws without a president's signature that became law. It's never been tested in court. The president of the United States doesn't need authorization to do this, as witnessed by President Obama, who did it 571 times in around Iraq and Syria, and nobody said a word.
James, even though this is symbolic, as we've discussed, do you think that this does hamstring the president and his ability to respond quickly and effectively?
No. I mean, and in particular, the Constitution never envisioned that the president would need a permission slip to defend U.S. forces. And the idea, the notion of consultation between the Congress and the president in the use of force is arguably a good one. I mean, I would argue, as I did during the Libyan intervention, that if there is time and you know you're going into a conflict and it could be protracted, of course, at the front end, the president should consult Congress. That just makes sense. But when you're in the middle of an operational activity, the notion that somehow the president should stop that and have a deliberative consultation process with Congress makes no sense. Nobody expected that when the U.S. got Bin Laden or Baghdadi in their sights, and they were in hours of making an operational mission, that everything would stop and they would go and talk to the Congress about that. In many ways, this is actually, I think, a more compelling situation. Soleimani was directly involved in real-time operational activities. The other guys were just sitting there.
All right, James, thank you so much. Shai, John, appreciate it as well. Now, as tensions with Iran escalate, Israel has unveiled a breakthrough laser to intercept